All 10 of the world's largest airlines have had fatal accidents in their histories, and so, with this level of inevitability, airlines must have a strictly defined plan for.
Chào mừng bạn đến với ứng dụng BadoVN, báo đọc bằng giọng nói hàng đầu Việt Nam. Bạn có thể tải hoàn toàn miễn phí trên Google Play cho Android hoặc trên chợ ứng dụng cho iPhone. Link tải được đính kèm trong phần mô tả cuối mỗi video. BadoVN luôn cập nhật tin tức 24 giờ nhanh nhất với đủ các đầu mục nóng hổi, thời sự, kinh doanh, pháp luật, sức khỏe, góc nhìn cuộc sống, tâm sự và đặc biệt, bạn có thể trao đổi hoặc tương tác với các thính giả khác. Giao diện ứng dụng được thiết kế thân thiện, trực quan, giọng đọc dễ nghe, truyền cảm chắc chắn sẽ làm quý thính giả hài lòng. Chuyên mục sức khỏe, cẩm nang các bí quyết sống khỏe, chăm sóc phòng tránh bệnh cho gia đình mỗi ngày. Tin mới nhất, nơi tổng hợp các tin xã hội, đời sống giải trí hot nhất 24 giờ. Chuyên mục tâm sự, chia sẻ tâm tư tình cảm của mọi người, đặc biệt là các vấn đề liên quan chuyện thầm kín, tình yêu, hôn nhân gia đình. Hãy tải BadoVN ngay, link tải được đính kèm trong phần mô tả mỗi video. Chúc các bạn một ngày tốt lành. Xin cảm ơn.
Or what to do after one of their airplanes crash. So, let's say an accident happens. This will almost certainly have something to do with landing or taking off. The overwhelming majority of accidents involve the runway. However, if an accident is fatal, it is much more likely that it has to do with a loss of control in flight or a controlled crash into terrain. Runway accidents represent more than 90% of accidents, but only account for 25% of fatal accidents. The airline really never is the first responder to an accident. That is typically firefighters and other emergency personnel, but as soon as word of an accident reaches them, the airline will begin to mobilize. Almost every airline out there will have what's called a go team. This is a group of people typically working at the airline's headquarters who train to be part of the crisis response function on top of their ordinary jobs. With larger airlines, this go team can be comprised of as many as hundreds of individuals filling a huge variety of functions. Larger long-haul airlines might also have smaller teams comprised of people working at their outstations who can more quickly get to crash sites while the main team travels from a headquarters. Now, each airline will have different procedures and protocols, but there are loose standards adopted by all. Typically within 3 to 4 hours of a crash, an airline's go team will have assembled and taken off from the headquarters airport. Usually, a standby flight crew and aircraft would be used for this dedicated flight. With them, they'd bring a go kit. Considering accidents can happen quite literally anywhere, this would include all sorts of things like satellite communications equipment, food, water, cooking equipment, personal protective equipment, warm clothing, tents, generators, tools, and more. The team's personnel are typically split up into dealing with 3 main areas: crisis support, humanitarian support, and communications. Each of these would likely be split up into a forward team and rear team. If the crash occurs in a remote location, for example, the forward team, including the most essential members of each of the larger teams, would likely go to the crash site and set up a literal base camp using the equipment in the go kit. Meanwhile, the rear team might set up in the nearest town with accommodations and facilities. At the crash site, a triage area is set up away and upwind from the aircraft wreckage. This might be done by some of the crisis response go team members or by emergency personnel. There, individuals would be split up into 3 groups: deceased, injured, and uninjured. The deceased and injured would typically be cared for by firefighters, medics, and other emergency personnel, whereas the airline go team would likely deal with the uninjured passengers. The rear go team will have, meanwhile, set up a survivor reception center, usually at a nearby hotel, and arrange transportation to that site. The largest group in the go team is typically the humanitarian assistance team, which is made up of volunteers among the airline's customer service staff, flight attendants, airport agents, and others. By grouping the passengers together in one facility, the airline separates them from media and centralizes them for investigatory interviews and support functions.